Tansei. My English name is Monique, and my traditional name is Mistikwashikoshis, which when translated from Cree to English means little drum. I received that name almost 23 years ago in ceremony when I was in treatment at a place in Vernon called Round Lake Treatment Center for recovery from alcoholism. I received that name in a Yuwipi ceremony, which is a Lakota ceremony that's a name-giving ceremony and a healing ceremony. So I always present that name to you so you know who I am beyond Monique, because there's more for me than my English name. That name, Mistikwashikoshis, goes back 9 generations on my dad's side and 7 generations on my mom's side. And when translated to English, it means little drum. And when the medicine man gave me that name, he said, your name isn't because of your stature. He said, your name is because your purpose in life is to remind people of their heartbeat. And when we think about when we're carrying babies, when children are in utero, what's the first sound they hear? Their mother's heartbeat. So this evening, my story is about paying attention to the messages. And it begins not very far from here, actually, up at the University of Victoria. At the time when this story begins, I was working as a psychiatric nurse in acute psychiatry in Kamloops, and I wanted to be able to contribute more. So I applied to the School of Social Work, and one of the things you had to do was write something called a personal statement. So when I came down here to Victoria for my interview from Kamloops, I was really intimidated in the interview because there was 5 people sitting there, and I was like 23 years old. And after the interview, I got up with wobbly legs, and I had my hand on the door, and I was about to open the door. And one of the women said, I look forward to reading your book one day. And I didn't think she was talking to me. So I continued to open the door, and she said, no, wait, Monique, I'm talking to you. She said, it's obvious by your personal statement that you're a gifted writer, so I look forward to reading your book one day. Well, I got my butt out of there as fast as I could. Because in my mind, I was 6 months sober. And in my mind, I was like, who am I to write a book? It was so far out of the concept of who I thought I could be in the world. But the seed got planted. I didn't end up going to the University of Victoria. I traveled. And I moved back to Kamloops, and I was working in a youth alcohol and drug program. And one day, a colleague invited me for lunch to Columbia Street in Kamloops. Some of you will know that street goes right through the main part of Kamloops to the Pizza Hut. A delicate lunch out. And I remember distinctly what I was wearing because I was a little smitten with her. So I had dressed appropriately. And about halfway through lunch, she said to me, you know, I see you writing with red rocks in the background and wearing funky glasses and writing a book. And I was like, that is really strange. But you know, when people see you differently, you want them in your life a little bit more, or at least I do. And so a couple of weeks later, I hit on her. And last week, we celebrated 20 years. She's up there in the back in the green jacket, but she won't want you to see her. We moved here to Victoria, and I started my Aboriginal business. And I didn't write, not in a way that was focused anyways. I began to work for this organization that took me all across the country doing really important work. But I wasn't doing my work. And so I was reminded many times about these pebbles, that we get them. And if we don't listen to the pebbles, we get rocks. I was in Toronto, and I'd gone to see a friend for a massage. And you know how when you have your head down in that donut? Right, about halfway through the session, it was like a Chinook came in, and the room got warm. And then I could hear the drum beating, and I could hear like eagles, like whoosh, whoosh, like the sound of their wings. And then I could hear the jingles that you might hear if you go to the power of the jingle dancers. And I had my eyes open through this donut. And then these ancestors, those who have gone before us, were putting their head underneath that donut. And they're saying, write the book. Why haven't you written the book? We've been telling you to write the book. So when you're not listening to your ancestors, it's not such a good thing. They were perturbed with me. So after that massage, I'm like, okay, I need to start writing again. The next day I was giving a presentation, and at the end of the presentation, I was talking about our history as Indigenous people in this country through a lens of resilience. At the end, this man stands up at the back of the room and makes a beeline to me. The first thing he says is, have you ever thought about writing a book? Well, there was the brick, right? I got my pebbles, I got my rock, and there was the brick. So I came home and I started to write. And I wrote quite seriously. But then life got busy again. And I got called away quite often for work. And in November 2011, I wasn't feeling very well. And so I went to the doctor. And she sent me for an x-ray and diagnosed pneumonia. And put me on antibiotics. And 10 days later, I still wasn't feeling better. So I went back to the walk-in clinic. And he sent me for x-rays again. 2 hours later, his assistant called and said, the doctor would like to see you this afternoon. And when you get those calls, it's not because they're celebrating your health. So my partner and I went, and they had found a 2-inch-sized tumor in my right lung. And in that moment, I realized this is probably the biggest message I'll ever get. And I need to begin to pay attention. Because I hadn't paid attention to the pebbles. I hadn't paid attention to the rocks. I had somewhat paid attention to the brick. But now the whole wall had come down. And through that recovery, I began to write again. They operated, removed the tumor in half of my upper right lung. And I can still remember when they called and said that that tumor was non-cancerous. The jubilation in my home. But what it also called for was a deeper commitment for me to pay attention to the messages. So there I lied in bed and I began to write. And I wrote with ferociousness. It was like something had opened up in me and it flowed. And sometimes I even closed my eyes as I wrote, and my fingers just worked so fast I could hardly keep up. As I got well, it was time to go back to work. And on my first trip back to Toronto, I remember walking into that office where I was doing the consulting work. And I could feel my chest tighten. And I could hardly breathe. And I knew that I wasn't supposed to be there. So I resigned. And I came home. And I sold my car. I loved that car. We cashed in our RRSPs, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I listened to those messages. Because just before that last trip on New Year's Eve, my family and I, we went to the Empress to welcome in New Year's Eve because our twins wanted to be able to jump into the pool at midnight. And that night, for some reason, our room overlooked the Union Club. And I was really drawn to keep looking out this window at the Union Club. And so Rhonda asked me, why do you keep looking out there? And I said, women have only been allowed in that building for just over the last 20 years. And one day I'm going to speak in there. And just as when we have people in our lives who support us ferociously, her response was, okay, well, make it happen. And so I continued to write. And we created this book called Hope, Faith, and Empathy. And I say we because it wasn't just me. Many of you will know Maya Angelou's beautiful poem for the grandmothers, where she says, I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. And for me, I feel like when I write, I sit there as one, but I write as 10,000. That the stories in this book are not all mine. They come from those who have gone before us. This book was self-published, and about 2 weeks after it came out, Carolyn called me and said, I'm wondering if you'd come and speak at one of my You Unlimited lunches. We have one coming up. And it just worked that I was available that day and honored to come. And at the end of the phone call, I realized I hadn't asked her where I was going to. So I said, oh, where am I coming? The Union Club. Like, thank you. At that luncheon, I met Carol Highland, who invited me to come and speak at her church. And after that beautiful visit at her church, she said to me, so what's next? And I said, well, I'm really looking for somebody to pick up Hope, Faith, and Empathy as a distributor. I've got my business and I need to be working on that and caring for my family. And she said, well, you know, we've just moved to a new farming community in Saanich and one of my neighbors does something with books. I said, well, here's an extra copy. You know, if you run into her, give it to her. And I really didn't think anything else about it after that. 2 weeks later, I'm coming home from the Friendship Center and I'm listening to CBC. And Joanne Roberts is on holidays and Gregor Craigie's in for her. And I'm about to pull into Fairfield Plaza and get my lucky parking spot in Thrifty's there in that plaza. And Gregor Craigie says, and today we have our BC book reviewer, Nikki Tate, with us. Nikki, what are you reviewing for us today? She said, oh, I'm reviewing a local author, Monique Gray Smith. And her book, Hope, Faith, and Empathy. My hands start to shake on the wheel and tears start to flow down my eyes and I find my parking spot and I listen to her review. That neighbor who happened to do something with books was the BC book reviewer for CBC. And unbeknownst to me, she had also sent my book to Sonanis Press, one of the publishing companies in our province who has been here for over 40 years. They picked up this book. And after 6 months of serious rewriting with new characters, new chapters, new title, new beginning, we launched Tilly, a story of hope and empathy, of hope and resilience in Toronto in September of 2013. 3 days short of a year later, I find myself in Winnipeg as part of a national award called the Burt Award for First Nations, Métis and Inuit Literature. And I feel like I've won simply being in this crowd of Sherry DeMoline and her beautiful book, The Girl Who Grew a Galaxy. Chief Bev Sellers and her changing book for our society called They Called Me Number One, which has been on the BC bestseller for over a year. And Thomas King's incredible book, The Inconvenient Indian. I felt like I'd won just simply being there. That night at the very end of the gala, they call up the 3 finalists. And my legs begin to shake because I'm one of those 3 finalists. And so in my mind, because I'm in this caliber, I'm thinking, Tilly's got 3rd. Wow, how exciting. And they announced Chief Bev Sellers for 3rd. And then there I stand beside Thomas King, who's like 6'4", and I'm like 5'1" on a good day. And I'm thinking, because he's Thomas King, the most prolific Indigenous writer in our history to date, thinking, Tilly's got 2nd. Holy crap! And then they announce him for 2nd place. And once I kind of compute what has happened, the first thought, conscious thought that goes through my head is, don't pee your pants. Because this is what had happened. And one of the most beautiful things that evening was that my mom was there to see that. After all those years of journeying through me with 11 years of addiction and recovery and all the things we've experienced as a family, there she was, sobbing, so proud. Last April, my best friend and I, we took a research road trip for my next book. And there I was, just as predicted, sitting amongst the red rocks with funky glasses on and writing. And so I share this with you because had I not finally began to listen to the messages none of the magic of this story would have happened. Had I not quit that lucrative consulting gig, sold my car, cashed in our RSPs, and took a leap of faith, none of the magic of this would have happened. And so I consider and I think about what next, and the importance of paying attention to those who cross our paths, to when our mala hits our watch, to when we're visiting with a friend and it's just the two of us in a room, but somebody beats the drum, to the books we're given, to the songs we're told to listen to the new people we're introduced to pay attention. Because really in life, it's one of the most extraordinary gifts we've been blessed with, is the gift to pay attention. Matakiwas, all my relations.